Part 57. Adorable Baby, The Miracle Doctor is So Awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 561. There is no longer any suspense in this battle, and the balance of victory continues to tilt towards our side. 2 hours later, corpses of monster beasts were lying on the ground under the city wall. The remaining monster beasts, suppressed by Yi Chang's hierarchy, were lying on the ground shivering and had lost the power to resist. Shen Yizi stopped and killed these monsters that had no power to resist. It would not be a battle, but a massacre. However, if he let them go directly, there was no guarantee that they would come again next time. She walked over with the Guanjiao sword covered with a thick layer of blood-colored ice crystals, and her consciousness washed over her like a wave: submit, or die. Most of the monsters lowered their heads, and Shen Yizi took them into the space. She killed the few stubborn ones who were left. The tide of beasts that almost led to the loss of Shen Haiguan ended like this. On the city wall, everyone was in disbelief at first, and then cheered. After the crisis was over, as soon as they relaxed, indescribable fatigue overcame them. The soldiers lay down on the ground one after another, with their weapons either directly under their heads or held in their arms, and fell asleep directly. After a while, snoring began one after another. Military doctors walked among the injured soldiers and helped them treat their wounds. Under the city wall, Shen Yizi took back the ambrosia and leech butterflies. These two were not able to adapt to the extremely cold climate in the north. After such a long time, they had already been frozen to the point of being unable to move smoothly. Yu Chang and Xiao let them continue to guard under the city wall to prevent the beast tide from attacking again. Shen Yizi lowered the sky boat and stepped on it together with Luo Yao Yao. He controlled the sky boat to fly up and landed on the wide corridor of the city wall. The few soldiers who were still awake watched them get off the ship with keen eyes. Xiao Xiang strode over and punched his chest with his big fist a few times. I won't say thank you for your kindness. I'm Xiao Xiang. If you two ask for anything from now on, Xiao will not hesitate to ask for anything. Shen Yizi shook his head. Brother Xiao is serious, we should take action. This is my master, also Switting's master, I am Shen. Before she finished saying her name, Xiao Xiang suddenly pointed at her with a look of surprise on her face. Sister-in-law. Ha ha ha, Xiao Ting has been talking to me a lot these days. It's true that being famous is not as good as meeting me. My sister-in-law is really admirable. He gave Shen Yizi a thumbs up. He looked at Luo Yao Yao again and said, this must be Mr. Luo. Luo Yao Yao waved his hand. Okay, don't talk nonsense, take us to see Switting quickly. Xiao Xiang's expression was stagnant, hesitating whether to tell them about Gu Switting's situation, but Shen Yizi said, Brother Xiao, we already know about Switting's situation, so you don't have to hide it from us. Xiao Xiang sighed heavily. Okay, you two, please come with me. Shen Yizi asked him to board the sky boat and asked him to show the way. It was Xiao Xiang's first time riding a flying magic weapon, and he was quite surprised. Seeing Shen Yizi's solemn expression, he comforted her and said, don't worry, brothers and sisters. Xiao Ting has survived many life and death situations before, and nothing will happen to her this time. However, Shen Yizi was not comforted. She did not really see Gu Switting. Her heart was always hanging there and could not fall down. Xiao Xiang said no more. The wooden building where Gu Switting lived was in front of him. Shen Yizi lowered his sky boat and jumped off, heading straight into the building. Luo Yao Yao is not slow either. The soldiers guarding the door saw the two people rushing in and wanted to stop them. Xiao Xiang followed and glared at them. Stop, this is Princess Chen and King Chen's master. The soldier opened his mouth in surprise, and then his eyes burst into an astonishing light. Princess Chen, the Princess Chen who provided them with a large amount of medicine for free, he actually saw it with his own eyes. So talented and beautiful, he and King Chen are indeed a match made in heaven. In the room, Gu Swiding was lying on the bed, her lips were pale, and she had not yet woken up. Because the injury was on her back, her upper body clothes were taken off to her waist. The wound on the back where the arrow had penetrated the skin was torn and black blood was flowing out. The military doctor was giving him medicine, using the same medicine that Gu Swiding had given him before. Before setting off, Shen Yizi prepared a large amount of various medicines for Gu Swiding. In addition to those for him, some were provided free of charge to the soldiers guarding the border, including Bigu pill to fill the stomach, Yunhuo pill to resist cold, and healing pill, rejuvenation pills and so on. Without these soldiers guarding this place without fear of hardships, how could they have lived their prosperous and peaceful life? She is not a great and noble person, but she still wants to do her best within her ability. After Gu Swiding arrived at the border, he handed all the medicines to Xiao Xiang and asked him to distribute them. Xiao Xiang did not distribute the medicine directly to the soldiers. After all, there were too few medicines and there were too many people to distribute the medicine, so he gave it directly to the military doctors for them to use. After several military doctors got the medicine, they studied it for a while and found that the medicine was really effective. They were grateful and curious about Princess Chen, thinking that if they could meet her, they could discuss the medical techniques with her. Enough. The military doctor who was giving medicine to Gu Swiding at the moment was named Wen. He had the best medical skills among the military doctors, but he was also helpless about Gu Swiding's injury. He didn't dare to move the half of the arrow in Gu Swiding's body, fearing that the action of taking the arrow would aggravate his injuries, but leaving the arrow in his body was not an option. He was worried and couldn't help but think of Princess Chen. If she were here, I don't know what to do. Just as he was chanting, the person actually appeared in front of him, and military Dr. Wen was surprised. It has been less than 2 days since King Chen's accident. Why did Princess Chen come here so quickly? Shen Yizi looked at the injury on Gu Swiding's back and felt angry. She originally thought he was injured by a monster, but now it seems that someone clearly wanted to kill him behind his back. But now is not the time to worry about this, it is important to cure him first. She took his pulse and had an idea. She said to Luo Yao Yao, "Master, please help me stay outside the house. I will operate on Swiding right now. Brother Xiao and this doctor, please help me get out of the way first." Xiao Xiang immediately said, "Okay, let's go out right away without disturbing my younger siblings to do Xiao Ting's hand or something." Military Dr. Wen wanted to stay and observe, but he pulled him out. Shen Yizi planned to take Gu Swiding to the space for surgery. Naturally, outsiders could not be present. Otherwise, Dr. Wen could still stay if he wanted to. Luo Yao Yao moved a chair and sat at the door. He and the guard at the door gathered near the stove and chatted, asking about the story of Gu Swiding's injury. Xiao Xiang and Dr. Wen didn't leave either, and the 4 grown men gathered around the stove to talk. Luo Yao Yao also took out roast chicken and spirits from the storage bag and treated them to food and drink. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 562. In the room, Shen Yizi put up a barrier and took out a formation disc to protect the house heavily. Then he took Gu Swiding into the space and appeared directly in the operating room she had arranged. King Bao and the other 3 were sent into the space when she entered the city gate, and they are playing outside at the moment. Shen Yizi didn't tell them that Gu Swiding was injured and unconscious, so as not to worry them. It has been 4 or 5 hours since I helped Gu Swiding take out half of the arrow from his body, and then used healing spiritual power to remove the poison attached to the arrow. Fortunately, before she performed the operation, the super light had already opened the time field, which lasted 4 or 5 hours inside but only a few minutes outside. After the operation, Shen Yizi had no spiritual energy left in his body. Because he was highly concentrated before, he now had a headache and was exhausted both physically and mentally. After feeding Gu Swiding a rejuvenation pill and bandaging his wound, She drank a bottle of rejuvenating liquid for herself and lay down next to him and fell asleep. She didn't know how long she slept, but she woke up with a gentle touch. Goose Whitting's hand was still covering the top of her head, and his voice was hoarse, "Are you awake?" Shenyazi hugged his hand and rubbed it. "When did you wake up?" "A little earlier than you." "How do you feel now?" "Does the wound still hurt?" Shenyazi stood up and touched his wound tenderly. "His back to chest has been wrapped with white gauze, one after another, and she also tied it with a refreshing bow. His body was directly poked with a hole by the arrow. Although she had given him the best medicine, it would take a lot of time to heal. When she thought about the arrow just missing his heart, her heart palpitated, and at the same time her eyes turned red with hatred for the person behind the scenes. Don't let that person be caught out by her, otherwise. Shenyazi was furious. Goose Whitting only felt an itch where her fingers touched lightly, and the itch spread from all directions. He pulled her into his arms with his long arms and rested his head on the crook of her neck. "It hurts, but we know each other. It won't hurt if you kiss me." These words immediately made Shenyazi laugh. Being able to say such words, it seemed that he was completely out of danger. Seeing that he was a patient, Shenyazi staggered his wounds and carefully hugged his waist, tilted his head and kissed his ear, which was very close to him, and asked with a smile, "Are you feeling better?" Her fleeting kiss was like a fire, igniting him in an instant. He stood up and looked at her with a gaze that seemed to set her on fire. Shenyazi pushed him down again and scolded him angrily, "Did you forget that you were injured? Just lie down and don't think about it." Goose Whitting. The charming thoughts were instantly shattered. He bit her neck a little aggrievedly and with a sense of revenge. Shenyazi held his head, feeling that he was like a big dog in need of coaxing, and said softly, "Be good, when you recover from your injury, I will follow you." Goose Whitting's breath tightened and he continued to push further, the posture on the last page of the booklet. "Shenyazi, it all depends on you." Goose Whitting's arms holding her tightened instantly, wishing that the injury on her back could be healed immediately. If it weren't for the injury on his back, Zhizi probably wouldn't have agreed to his request. Similarly, if it weren't for the injury, he would have become one with her. It's true that success and failure also hurt. Shenyazi patted him on the shoulder and motioned for him to move away. "Are you hungry? I'll get some food." Goose Whitting was indeed hungry, so he reluctantly let her go and followed her with his eyes. Shenyazi went out to check on Qingbao and the others. He felt relieved when he saw that they were having a great time and that several puppets were watching. She cooked a pot of fish fillet porridge in a constant burning cauldron, and took a few ready-made side dishes and snacks from the food store, packed them in food boxes and carried them into the room. Goose Whitting kept looking eagerly in the direction of the door. When he saw her coming in, his eyes lit up. Shenyazi is a little funny. After being injured, Goose Whitting turned into a clingy baby. She walked over, brought out the porridge and vegetables, placed them on the low table beside the bed, helped him up, and stuffed several soft pillows behind his back for him to lean on comfortably. She held the porridge, stirred it with a spoon for a while, scooped up a spoonful, blew on it, and then put it to his mouth. Goose Whitting looked at her, his eyes so focused and gentle that they seemed to melt away. He obediently opened his mouth and took the porridge into his mouth, with bubbles called happiness bubbling in his heart. When Shenyazi fed him the second spoonful, he reached out and turned the spoon towards her. "You eat too." The two of them shared a can of porridge. The side dishes and snacks on the table have all been finished. The two of them lay quietly together after eating. Even if they didn't say anything, the atmosphere was very comfortable. After 2 days of recovering from his injuries in the space, Goose Whitting has recovered more than half of his injuries. Walking, sitting, and lying down are no longer a problem. However, he still treats himself as a seriously injured patient and wants to kiss and hug him at every turn, as if he suddenly got through to Rendure. Pulse, transformed into a coquettish spirit. Shen Yizi also left it to him. Okay, it's almost time for us to go out. When Gu Swiding asked for a kiss despite his injury again, Shen Yizi allowed him to be frivolous for a while, and finally pushed him away with a slight gasp. If this continues, she is afraid that she will be unable to resist and obey him. Gu Swiding stroked her lips and said, "Well, it's time to go out, but please cooperate with me in a play." The name of the scene is Fake Death, and the purpose is naturally to expose the person who was behind the plot. Since the people behind the scenes want to kill him, then he will die to him. Otherwise, if he is fine this time, next time that person attacks, he may not be able to escape like this time. Gu Swiding wanted to go into battle in person and asked Shen Yizi if she could refine a drug to fake death, but she said no. "You don't have to act on your own, it's up to me." Shen Yizi exchanged it for a high-level stand-in puppet, just like the previous Yuan Bao. The puppet was wrapped in a thick cocoon, and the situation inside could not be seen clearly, and his consciousness could not penetrate it. Gu Swiding followed Shen Yizi's instructions and dripped a drop of blood on it. The thick cocoon absorbed his essence and blood, becoming gradually transparent, and a figure appeared inside, exactly like Gu Swiding. He tore open the cocoon and came out. Gu Swiding looked at the person in front of him, his face turned dark because he was not wearing any clothes. He hurriedly covered Shen Yizi's eyes, threw a set of clothes over, and said coldly to the puppet, "Put it on." There was a rustling sound. Soon, the puppet put on his clothes. Shen Yizi completely copied Gu Swiding's previous injuries onto the puppet, inserted the half-taken arrow into it, and then took him out of the space. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 563. Shen Yizi spent 2 days in the space and less than an hour outside. She put the puppet on the bed and arranged the room as if it had just been operated on. She took the arrow out of the puppet's body and placed it on an iron plate aside. After everything was put away, she adjusted the expression on her face, removed the barriers and formations, and opened the door. At the door of the house, Luo Yao Yao and 4 others were sitting around the stove, talking. When they heard the door opening, they hurriedly looked inside and saw Shen Yizi looking pale and weak. Luo Yao Yao's heart skipped a beat. Originally, he was sure that the young apprentice would be able to rescue the eldest apprentice, but now looking at her appearance, he was not sure. He asked in a trembling voice, "Zhizi, Swiding, he?" Shen Yizi rubbed his face. "I have taken out the arrow from his body, but..." The but is the most feared in everything, because the words after the but are the key point, and they are often overwhelming. "But what?" Xiao Xiang asked impatiently. Shen Yizi lowered his eyes and leaned weakly against the door. "There is still a kind of poison attached to the arrow. I can only suppress this poison temporarily, but if it cannot be detoxified within 3 days. She did not finish what she said, but everyone present realized it. Xiao Xiang punched the wall with his fist, almost breaking the wall. "Don't let me find that who shot Xiao Ting from behind. Otherwise, I will have to cut him off piece by piece." Shen Yizi looked at him. "Brother Xiao, I want to ask you something." "You say." "I hope you can catch the murderer as soon as possible. Maybe the murderer holds the antidote." Xiao Xiang scratched his hair and promised her with red eyes, "Don't worry, sister, I will definitely dig out that and let you deal with it." Xiao Xiang went in, took a look at Gu Swiding, and strode away to catch the murderer. Military Doctor Wen also sighed and left. The guard guarding the door wiped his eyes and still stood upright at the door. Shen Yizi and Luo Yao Yao were the only 2 people left in the room. Luo Yao Yao waved his hand to create a soundproof barrier, and struck Shen Yizi on the head with just 1 finger. Shen Yizi was confused. "Master, why are you knocking me?" Luo Yao Yao glared at her. You are still asking me? You and that brat did such a big thing without consulting me, and you still want to hide it from me. Do you still think that I am your master? Shen Yizi was really surprised now and subconsciously looked at Gu Switting on the bed. Master, do you recognize it? Luo Yao Yao said angrily, your master and I have never seen anything like a ghost or a snake. How can we not even recognize a stand-in puppet, not to mention that this puppet was made by the old woman at first glance? At first, he really thought that his eldest apprentice was going to die. His hearts were all tied together. But when he came in and took a look, well, the person lying there was not his apprentice at all, but a puppet. In fact, except for the fact that the puppet does not have Gu Switting's memory and personality, he is a replica of Gu Switting in every other aspect. Even his strength is exactly the same, and most people will never recognize it. But is Luo Yao Yao an ordinary person? He is also a legendary boss in the Qingyuan world, not to mention that the puppet maker is an old acquaintance of his. Her strong personal style is evident at first glance, and it is difficult for him not to recognize her. Seeing his master sitting far away, leaning away and looking angry, Shen Yizi walked over to him, pulled his sleeve and shook it. Master, we didn't hide it from you on purpose. Humph, Luo Yao Yao turned to the other side. Shen Yizi turned around again. It's all Xueting's fault. He asked me to cooperate with him in a fake death scene so that the person who wanted to harm him could be exposed. She did not hesitate to pass the blame to Gu Switting in the space. But his injury hasn't healed yet. How can I be willing to let him act with a seriously injured body? What if there is an accident? So, I asked a friend to buy a stand-in puppet to lie here in his place. Hearing this, Luo Yao Yao's ears twitched. When did the old woman become friends with the young apprentice? And isn't she staying in the Qingyuan world? When did you come to this lower realm? One more thing, the little apprentice has never left this room before, right? How did she ask the old woman to buy it? He had too many questions in his mind, but seeing that the young apprentice was unwilling to explain in detail, it was hard for him to ask. Shen Yizi hugged Luo Yao Yao's arm. Master, I didn't intend to hide it from you. I was planning to tell you, but you found out on your own. As expected of my master, he is amazing. If I hadn't known that this was, I can't even recognize the puppet. She slapped her with a rainbow fart, and a smile suddenly appeared on Luo Yao Yao's face. He poked her forehead and snorted arrogantly, don't think that I won't care if you say a few nice words. A kind of I haven't calmed down yet, it's up to you to figure it out attitude. Shen Yi understood the situation and quickly moved things out of the space. In a short time, the 8 immortals table in the room was filled to the brim. What she brought out was nothing but hot pot and various side dishes. Only the base ingredients were put in the hot pot, and no soup was added. Even so, it still released a spicy aroma. Luo Yao Yao swallowed his saliva. If he could have a hot and fragrant hot pot in this cold weather, it would be a fairy-like enjoyment. He put away everything on the table with a wave of his hand, preparing to secretly hide in his room at night and feast. As for now, he still has to play the role of a master who is worried about his disciples. Do you want my help with this matter? Luo Yao Yao glanced at the puppet lying on the bed. Shen Yizi shook his head and said, Master, I have another thing to ask you. Explain. I think there is something wrong with this beast wave. Maybe it was caused by someone behind the scenes to lure Xueting to the border so that I can take the opportunity to attack him. So, you want me to go to the raging snow sea to see what caused the beast tide? Luo Yao Yao took over what she said. Shen Yizi looked at him with bright eyes. Yeah. Luo Yao Yao pretended to be deep in thought. It's fine if you want me to go, but dash. He raised 3, no, 5 fingers. It will take 5 hot pot meals. Shen Yizi almost laughed out loud. Why is her master so cute? Okay, 10 meals are fine. This is what you said. Luo Yao Yao's eyes lit up, as if he was afraid that she would regret it. Shen Yizi immediately took out the soup ingredients and the amount of vegetables for the 10 stew hot pot, and put them in a separate storage bag for him. He could just take them out when he was eating. After receiving 10 hot pot meals, Luo Yao Yao was so happy that her teeth burst into laughter. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 564. Wait, I'm going to take a trip to the raging snow sea to find out the cause of the beast tide. Luo Yao Yao stood up and walked out. As soon as he came out, he put on a sad and heavy expression. Shen Yizi smiled secretly, her master was also an actor. Xiao Xiang secretly searched for the murderer, while Shen Yizi plunged into the newly opened temporary pharmacy to develop an antidote. From time to time, military Dr. Wen came to observe her and rushed to help her. Shen Yizi didn't stop him, and even deliberately showed him some skills in refining medicine. He didn't avoid any prescriptions. For this, Dr. Wen was full of gratitude and admiration. Princess Chen was really selfless and kind-hearted. He almost turned into Shen Yizi's fanboy. However, 1 or 2 days passed, Shen Yizi worked day and night, and still failed to develop an antidote. Dr. Wen was watching from the side, her eyes bloodshot from the exhaustion, and he wanted to persuade her to stop and rest for a while, but he muttered his lips twice and did not say anything. Now that King Chen has poisoned his heart, Princess Chen is fighting for her life with the Lord of Hell. She is not willing to waste even a single cent. How can she stop to rest? He could only try his best to do everything he could to relieve her burden. Seeing that it was already dark, Dr. Wen had no intention of leaving yet, and was ready to fight with her in the pharmacy until dawn. Shen Yizi saw it in his eyes and was anxious in his heart. Brother Dei, if you don't leave, how can I go into space to reunite with my husband? Even though she worked hard to refine medicine and develop antidotes during the day, in fact, this kind of work intensity was nothing to her. At night, she closed the door of the pharmacy tightly, arranged all the barriers and formations, and then slipped into the space to reunite with her husband and son. She did not want to live too leisurely. As for the bloodshot eyes and the tiredness on your face, those are all makeup effects. Shen Yizi said hoarsely, Dr. Wen, you can go back and rest. I'll be fine here. Dr. Wen refused, it's okay, princess, I can still help if I stay. Shen Yizi. The play was so realistic that honest people believed it. She felt her conscience hurt a little. But in order to catch the mastermind behind the scenes, we can only suppress this guilt temporarily. When the murderer is caught, she will reward him well. Seeing that Dr. Wen refused to leave despite any words, Shen Yizi had no choice but to adopt other methods. She rubbed her belly and said, Mr. Wen, you must be hungry too, right? I'm going to make something simple to eat. How can this be so embarrassing? Dr. Wen waved his hand hurriedly. What's the matter? Just wait a moment. It'll be quick. Shen Yizi walked out the door. Not long after, he came in carrying a food box. There are 2 large bowls of noodles and a pile of egg pancakes inside. The noodles are beef noodles, hot and spicy, with a few bright green vegetables on top and an egg inside. As soon as military Dr. Wen saw it and smelled the smell, he swallowed hard. Shen Yizi took out another bottle of chili sauce and said, you can add some chili sauce. It will be spicy and fragrant when mixed with noodles. Okay. At this time, Dr. Wen could not say anything else. By the way, Xiao Zhang is probably hungry too. I'll serve him a bowl. Dr. Wen, you eat first. Shen Yizi walked out again. Go into the kitchen and serve a large bowl of noodles to Xiao Zhang, who is guarding the courtyard gate. Are you hungry? Eat a bowl of noodles to warm yourself up. Xiao Zhang took it blankly and felt the heat coming from the wall of the bowl. He was so moved that he almost shed tears on the spot. It wasn't until Shen Yizi left that he realized, thank you, princess, thank you. In the room, Dr. Wen was already very greedy, but Shen Yazi hadn't come back yet, so he couldn't bear to move his chopsticks and just stared longingly. Shen Yazi stepped into the house and couldn't help but smile when he saw it. "Didn't I tell you to eat first?" Mr. Wen smiled naively. When Shen Yazi picked up the chopsticks, he immediately took them in his hands and ate happily. "Ah, it's delicious." Military Dr. Wen was sweating profusely after eating. The bottom of a large bowl of noodles reached the bottom within a few seconds. He even picked up the bowl and drank all the noodle soup. On the opposite side, Shen Yazi only moved a few chopsticks. "There is still something in the pot." Mr. Wen immediately ran to the kitchen. After finishing the meal, Dr. Wen felt so comfortable that he was going to heaven. He rubbed his belly. After a while, a wave of sleepiness swept over him and he hit his head on the table. Shen Yazi breathed a sigh of relief and finally fooled the person. Dr. Wen slept on the table all night. Fortunately, Shen Yazi set up a constant temperature array in the room when he left. The room was always warm. Instead of freezing, he slept soundly. The next morning I was woken up by a strong force. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a crying face in front of me. He was startled. "Xiao Zhang, what's going on?" Xiao Zhang was so choked with tears that he couldn't speak. "Your Majesty, he dash." Dr. Wen suddenly had a bad premonition and grabbed him suddenly. "What happened to the prince?" "He died of poison." Xiao Zhang couldn't bear it any longer. He sat down on the ground and cried like a child weighing 280 pounds. There was a buzz in Dr. Wen's head, and he felt like the world was spinning. He tried several times and couldn't stand up. His legs were weak. Finally stood up and ran towards the main room. They saw Xiao Xiang standing at the door of the house, his fists clenched, his jaw tightened, looking up at the sky, and the aura of grief on his body made his eyes heat up. Military Dr. Wen wiped his eyes and staggered over. "The house door is closed." He pushed it several times but failed to push it away. "Who closed the door?" "You don't need to think about it to know." He didn't try again and sat down on the cold steps with his shoulders slumped. After a while, Dr. Wen asked, "Sir, has the murderer been found?" Xiao Xiang gritted his back molars and said, "No." After saying this, the two fell into a deathly silence. At this moment, the door of the room was opened. The two of them looked over and saw Shen Yazi standing in the door dressed in plain clothes. His eyes were red, but there was no sadness on his face, only a calmness like dead water. "Her heart is dead." Shen Yazi's appearance at this moment conveyed such a message. Xiao Xiang and Dr. Wen both felt unspeakably uncomfortable. Boom. Xiao Xiang knelt down in front of Shen Yazi. Military Dr. Wen looked at him in shock. The expression on Shen Yazi's face almost cracked. "Brother and sister, I failed to live up to your expectations and failed to find the murderer." Xiao Xiang slammed his fist on the ground, thinking about killing himself. Fortunately, he still boasts that he manages Shanghai High with a unified mind, but he doesn't know that people with ulterior motives have long been mixed in. If not, Xiao Ting wouldn't. He is still so young, he has only been married for less than a month, and he still has several cute young children waiting for him to grow up with them. The more Xiao Xiang thought about it, the more uncontrollably sad he became. A man as tall as an iron tower, who had always espoused blood and not shed tears in his life, was crying uncontrollably at this moment. As soon as the hot tears left my eyes, they were frozen into ice beads and fell to the ground one by one. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 565. Shen Yazi spoke with a hollow voice, "Brother Xiao, I don't blame you. It's a blessing for Shueting to have a brother like you in this life. I'm not familiar with the place and place. I'll leave it to Brother Xiao to take care of his death." "I'll do it right now." Xiao Xiang stood up and strode outside, with a biting wind blowing around him. "Princess." Military Dr. Wen looked at Shen Yizi with worried eyes. Dr. Wen, I'm fine. If someone comes later, please ask Dr. Wen to help entertain them. I'll go in and stay with Xueting for a while longer. Shen Yizi gave him a faint smile, turned around and entered the room. Her smile seemed like a forced smile to Dr. Wen. Unexpectedly, Shen Yizi showed a relieved expression as soon as he turned around. The more grief these friends of Gu Switing felt, the more guilty and uncomfortable she felt. However, in order to make this fake death scene realistic and hide it from the people behind it, she had to hide it from them and continue to act out. The news of Gu Switing's death spread among the army. The soldiers were all in disbelief. Their first reaction was, how is this possible? In their hearts, Gu Switing is a god of war existence. He is indestructible. Even in the face of difficult battles, he can lead them to victory. Even if he is injured, he can appear in front of them in high spirits the next day. This makes them often subconsciously ignore that he is actually a human being, made of flesh and blood, and can be injured, or even die. It wasn't until the mourning hall was set up and the soldiers came to express their condolences and saw with their own eyes the motionless and soundless man lying in the ice coffin that they really believed that Gu Switing was really dead. Eternally separated from their heavenly beings. Many people burst into tears on the spot. Kowtowing and banging in front of the ice coffin. Shen Yizi played the role of a widow seriously, kneeling in front of the brazier as silently as dead water, mechanically adding paper money into it. My condolences to the princess. The princess is so pitiful. The prince and the princess have been married for less than a month. This is really sighs, pity, comfort, all kinds of sounds came into his ears. Shen Yi knew that his face was numb with grief, but in his heart, he felt like laughing. Xiao Xiang was still afraid that she would do something stupid, so he specially ordered his own soldiers to go to Suiyang City to pick up his wife and ask her to accompany her. Mrs. Xiao was dressed plainly when she came. After entering the mourning hall, she lit incense for the person in the coffin, and then stayed with Shen Yizi. She held her hand, pulled her into her arms, and patted her back. Brother and sister, cry out, don't hold it in your heart. You often cannot cry when you are truly sad, but only by crying can your emotions be vented. It snowed heavily for a day, covering the entire northern region in pure white. The next day, Gu Switing's coffin was carried onto the high platform of the training ground. Underneath, all the officers and soldiers of the Shanghai Navy were solemnly arranged in a military formation, holding weapons in hand and standing silently in the snow, letting the wind and snow invade. Dayanzishan. There was silence all around at this moment. Shen Yizi heard the sadness in their hearts. The sad voices gathered into a torrent, lamenting the death of Gu Switing. In the evening, Shen Yizi walked up to the high platform and bowed deeply to the soldiers. Because of her actions, there was a small commotion in the originally tight military formation, and many people subconsciously wanted to avoid it. After a long time, Shen Yizi straightened up and left step by step. In the wind and snow, her back was so thin, as if she would fall down at any time. However, until she left everyone's sight, she stood strong. Xiao Xiang glanced at his wife, and Mrs. Xiao immediately understood and followed her. After 3 days of rest, Gu Switing's coffin was buried in Tianling Mountain. After returning, Shen Yizi locked himself in the room and saw no one. Mrs. Xiao was very worried and could only look through the window from time to time to make sure she didn't do anything stupid. In a separate wooden house in the military camp. This is the residence of a lieutenant general. At this moment, the invisible Gu Switing was standing on the roof, his consciousness shrouding the people in the room. The breath of the archer remained on the severed arrow taken out from his body. The tracking talisman can follow the breath on it to find it. He followed the tracking talisman all the way to find it. The people in the house were undoubtedly the ones who shot cold arrows at him. It's just that he is just the final implementer, and he is not the real mastermind behind the scenes. In the room, the deputy general had no idea that he was under surveillance and was writing a letter at his desk. It was nothing more than telling the person who ordered him that Gu Swiding was dead and the mission was completed. In the past few days, Xiao Xiong has been tracking down the murderer like a mad dog. He had to be careful to avoid exposing himself. It was not until today that he had time to spread the news. He finished writing the letter and was about to roll it up and stuff it into the bamboo tube when he suddenly smelled a subtle sweet fragrance. Where does this fragrance come from? With such a question running through his mind, he lost consciousness, his eyes dull, staring ahead aimlessly. That incense is an ecstasy incense that can confuse people's minds and reveal the secrets in their hearts. Gu Swiding appeared in front of him. Who is the person behind you? Asterisk. In the wooden house, Shen Yizi was lying on the bed, staring blankly at the roof, tears falling silently, soaking the pillow. Mrs. Yao came in with a food box and sighed heavily when she saw it. Brothers and sisters, at least eat a little. If you don't eat or drink like this, your body will collapse sooner or later. Qingbao and the others are still pointing at you. Mrs. Yao learned from her husband that although Shen Yizi and Gu Swiding had been married for only a month, they already had 2 4-year-old children, Qingbao and Yuanbao. She is also a mother, so Shen Yizi will always listen if she thinks of using her children as an entry point. Sure enough, after hearing the word Qingbao, her eyes became lively. She sat up from the bed and took the bowl from Mrs. Yao's hand. Thank you, sister-in-law. Having not spoken for a long time, when she spoke, her throat seemed to be stuck, and her voice was hoarse. Mrs. Yao stroked her hair. Thank you, I don't have to see my sister-in-law outside. Shen Yizi just took a sip of porridge when he noticed Gu Swiding coming in and continued eating calmly. Gu Swiding leaned against the cabinet on the side and watched with interest as she looked as if she felt more sorrow than death. His presence obviously put Shen Yizi's acting skills to a great test. It was like an actor having his family visiting the show while he was acting. It felt shameful and awkward. She finished the porridge quickly. Mrs. Yao was very pleased. Eat another bowl and you will see how thin you are, which is really heartbreaking. Shen Yizi shook his head. Sister-in-law, I'm full. Well, you have a good rest and I won't disturb you. Mrs. Yao went out carrying the food box. As soon as the door of the house was closed, Shen Yizi fell into someone's arms. I never knew that Zizi was so good at acting. A joking voice rang in her ears, and heat sprayed into her cochlea. Shen Yizi glanced at him sideways. Huh, I wasn't forced out. Did that person explain? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 566. Northern Territory, Xianming Prefecture, Beimiao City. This is a city with cold and rough lines, but it does not lose its grandeur and brightness. As the capital of the Northern Territory, merchants traveling from north to south gather here, and the prosperity of Beimiao City is no worse than that of other territories. There are 3 treasures in the north: fir, ginseng, and ginseng grass. The first 2 require professional hunters or ginseng pickers to get them, but ginseng grass can be found everywhere in the north, but this kind of grass can be found everywhere. Grass is the treasure of poor people. Not only can it be woven into warm straw mats, straw sandals, etc., it is also particularly resistant to burning and has high heat capacity. Many people rely on it to survive the winter. On the street, most people are wrapped in thick fur coats, like moving fur coat spirits. There is no way, the climate in the north is very cold in winter, and dripping water turns into ice, so people have to wear thicker clothes to keep out the cold. Among the passers-by who were wrapped up in bears, the thin clothes of a couple strolling hand in hand stood out. From the back, the couple has a good appearance, and they must be outstanding in appearance. Who knows, when looking from the front, the couple is very ordinary. These two people are naturally Shen Yizi and Gu Swiding in disguise. Things went back to one day ago. After Shen Yizi asked that question, Gu Swiding said, "He is a man from Yuming Pavilion who is ambushing in the army. Someone placed an order with Yuming Pavilion for my life." Then he told the story about Yuming Pavilion assassinating him once before, and he was a little confused. Netherworld Pavilion will not accept the same task twice, not to mention that they failed the previous time, but they made an exception for me. It seems like someone in the chamber wants my life. Shen Yizi has some knowledge of Yuming Pavilion. After all, Xiaoming, one of the 4 underworld envoys of Yuming Pavilion, is working under her now. She has also placed orders at Manfaju, one of the branches of Yuming Pavilion, several times before. This organization takes on all kinds of tasks, a bit like a mercenary union. Originally, she had no ill feelings towards this organization, but now they actually assassinated Gu Swiding. If it weren't for the contract between her and Gu Swiding, Netherworld Pavilion would have succeeded this time. The gap between them has been forged. If you want to know who single-handedly assassinated Gu Swiding, you have to go to Yuming Pavilion. From the Deputy General's mouth, Gu Swiding found out that he belonged to the Yuming Pavilion branch in Beimiao City, Xianming Prefecture, so he and Shen Yizi came here in disguise. The two of them seemed to be wandering around the street casually, but in fact they were heading towards the Netherworld Pavilion branch. Of course, shopping is really shopping. When he sees a shop or stall that interests him, Shen Yizi will take Gu Swiding to look at it. If he sees something he likes, he will buy it directly. In a short time, she bought a lot of good leathers and medicinal materials. The main medicinal materials are wild ginseng and deer antlers. These are rare and precious medicinal materials found elsewhere, but here they are piled directly on the shelves for customers to choose from. Of course, whether you can choose truly good products depends on the customer's discernment. After all, there is no shortage of people who cheat and pass off inferior products. Most of the medicinal materials in Shen Yizi's space are grown in the humid climate of the south. There are not many medicinal materials in the north, so he can take this opportunity to replenish some. The boss saw that she was young and a woman, so he originally wanted to take advantage of her by selling inferior medicinal materials to her. However, after seeing the medicinal materials she selected, he immediately understood that she was an expert and stopped talking. Shen Yizi's selection of medicinal materials was also very simple and crude. With a glance of her consciousness, she could feel whether their medicinal properties were sufficient, so she pointed at many of them without even looking at them. This, and this are not needed, and the rest are not needed. Wrap them all up for me. Looking like a wealthy person who says I'm not short of money. Looking at her boss's surprised look, she felt very happy. Finally gave her a chance to perform a classic scene in the novel. Gu Swiding was watching her performance with a smile on her lips and loving eyes. After she finished choosing, she paid obediently, and then the large pile of medicinal materials disappeared with a wave of her hand. The couple walked out of the shop under the surprised eyes of the boss. After walking for a while, Shen Yizi was attracted by a pet shop again. The products sold here are all fluffy pets, such as sables, rabbits, and foxes. They are all little cubs, huddled in a cage, very cute. Shen Yi knew it and couldn't help but walked in. He even saw a little snow leopard inside, and so on. That group in the corner is actually rolling. No, although this one looks very similar to Gun Gun, there are actually some differences. For example, its eyes are pink, and the thing it is holding and chewing is not bamboo, but iron. This little thing actually ate a piece of iron with relish. Seeing Shen Yizi stopping in front of the cage, the waiter stepped forward and introduced to her with a smile, "Madam, you have taken a fancy to this iron-eating beast cub." This iron-eating beast is less than 3 months old, and it is the right one to recognize its owner. When you buy it and raise it for a while, it will become very close to you. Moreover, the iron-eating beast is not troublesome at all and is very well behaved. You only need to feed it a few pieces of iron every day. Seeing her move, the man continued to persuade her with all his strength, "Look, isn't it very cute because it's round? And it's very warm in your hands. It can also warm your hands. I'll hold it out for you to feel." The man opened the cage, took out the little iron-eating beast, and handed it to Shenyazi. How could she refuse? He quickly took it and held it in his arms. Oh my God, it's really warm. Although she doesn't feel cold, it's really comfortable. The little iron-eating beast was also really well behaved. It continued to eat its own piece of iron, no matter how Shenyazi moved his hands up and down on it. You touch it, she handed the small iron-eating beast to Goosewitting. Goosewitting rubbed the little guy's ears. After playing with Xiao Gungun for a while, Shenyazi looked around the store. When she saw a small pangolin mixed in among a bunch of fluffy pets, she hesitated for a moment. Forget it, even if the pangolin has no down, it shouldn't be discriminated against. Brother, I bought all the pets in this store. The space is mostly made up of domesticated livestock, raised for meat, but the species is still not rich enough. If we buy all the pets here and bring them into the space, it won't be long before there will be a bunch of fluffy wild species in the space. Thinking of that scene, her eyes lit up. The clerk rubbed his ears, thinking he was hallucinating. Madam, do you really want to buy all the pets in our store? Isn't it possible? Shenyazi asked a little strangely. This shop shouldn't push the business it gets to other places, right? The guy shook his head hurriedly. No, 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 of course. This is the first time he has seen such customers buying pets in batches. He hurriedly went to the inner room to invite the shopkeeper. Such a big business was no longer something he, a young boy, could handle. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 567. While Shenyazi was waiting with Gungun in his arms, a 15 or 16-year-old girl walked in with a group of maids and servants. The girl was wearing a snow-white robe, without a trace of color, and her face looked a little sickly pale. No blood. Xiao Lizu's eyes lit up when she saw the rolling ball in Shenyazi's arms, and she came over. Sister, can I touch it? Shenyazi said generously, okay. Her first impression of this girl was not bad. After playing with Gungun for a while, Xiao Lizu took back his hand with some reluctance and politely thanked him. Thank you, sister. At this time, the shop owner came out and was led by the waiter to Shenyazi. Madam, if you want to buy all the pets in our shop, the sincerity benefit is 38,090 taels, and I will wipe out the change for you. You can give me 38,000 taels, and in addition, our store will give you a precious pet egg. The waiter behind the shop owner brought over a basket covered with straw and soft cotton cloth, with an egg as big as a basketball lying inside. This egg is all white, and there is nothing special about it except that it is big. Moreover, Shenyazi also sensed that the egg's vitality was very weak. Let alone hatching, it would probably die soon. This shopkeeper is really a profiteer. He gave her a dying egg. However, the shop owner didn't know that his true identity had been seen through, and he emphasized to Shenyazi how precious this egg was. I personally brought this egg out of the raging snow sea. Its mother is an ice blue bird with the blood of phoenix. It is beautiful and powerful. Its wings are 2 to 3 feet long, 6-9 meters. He can also control the ice and snow to fight. That time, the people he brought me and I almost didn't make it out of the raging snow sea. Shenyazi glanced at the shopkeeper with a half smile. Since it is so precious, why are you willing to give it to me? The shopkeeper paused and said with a grimace, this ice blue bird egg is precious, but to be honest with you, madam, I have brought it back for more than half a year, but there is still no sign of it hatching. As a future, I hope that the person it brings out can successfully hatch and come out to see the world. It is also a hope that it will be handed over to Madam. He looked at Shenyazi calmly, and his tone was more sincere than before. However, Shenyazi still saw through his nature as a profiteer, but he was just afraid that the egg would fall into his hands. So considering that she bought so many pets at once, she might as well give the egg away before it is completely scrapped. If it can be hatched, everyone will be happy. If not, he will not suffer any loss. Shenyazi stroked the eggshell, and suddenly there was a slight fluctuation in the eggshell. Her heart moved and she injected a spiritual energy into it. The spiritual energy submerged into the eggshell, and the fluctuations of life inside became stronger, revealing a bit of eagerness and desire, as if to say, more. She put the egg back into the space with her backhand. I accepted the egg. Thank you to the shopkeeper for the gift. I don't know where she hid such a big egg. The shop owner glanced at her and suddenly felt a cold gaze falling on her. It came from the young man next to her who had been silent but felt inexplicably oppressive. The shop owner looked away knowingly and asked with a smile, with so many pets, I wonder where Madam is staying? The store clerk can send them to you. Goose Whitting paid the money and said, send it to Goo's mansion in Qingtong Lane, Chengzi Street. The people who live in Chengzi Street are either powerful or wealthy people, and they are always not simple people. The fact that this young master can place his mansion there shows that he has a good status. When the shop owner heard this, his face became more attentive. Okay, we will send these pets to your house safely and safely. You two go slowly. Shenyazi nodded to Xiao Lizu when leaving, and left the shop with Goose Whitting. Xiao Lizu withdrew his curious gaze. The maid behind her stepped forward and whispered to her, Miss, you have been out for a long time today, it's time to go back and take medicine. Xiao Lizu sighed softly, okay. On the street, Shenyazi held Goose Whitting's arm and said, do you have another courtyard here? Goose Whitting nodded. During the 8 years of guarding the border, he didn't stay in the military camp all the time. He would also go out for a walk during his breaks. Xiao Xiong's home happened to be in Beimiao City, so he also set up shop here. There is a courtyard where you can stay for 2 days during your break. I'll take you over to have a look later. Okay. It's almost noon, no more shopping, let's go to Zhenchan residence. Good. Zhenchanju is the branch of Yuming Pavilion in Beimiao City. The reason why it has a different name from the Manfaju branch in Langcheng is probably because they are afraid that one family will be exposed and other branches will be affected. I don't know what the people in Yuming Pavilion think, but they actually regard the restaurant as a branch. Could it be that the people in Yuming Pavilion are actually a bunch of foodies? With Yuming Pavilion as its backing, Zhenchanju's facade is so magnificent, and every detail inside is exquisite, showing its style everywhere. Most people probably don't have the confidence to set foot there. As soon as Shenyazi and the two came in, a handsome waiter came up to greet them, you two, please come in. Are you going to dine in the lobby or in a private room? Goose Whitting showed a jade talisman and said, take us to the backyard. Upon hearing this, the waiter understood that the two of them were here to discuss business. He led the two of them through a winding corridor, past a green garden, and led the two of them into a courtyard. The maid served tea and snacks and stood quietly aside. Shenyazi saw a red plum blossom blooming in the yard and walked over to admire it. White snow covers the red plum blossoms. The coldness of the snow and the fragrance of the plum blossoms mix together, making people feel happy when they smell it. I've kept you two waiting. A pure and elegant woman walked in and saluted Shenyazi and the two. This woman is Meiyu, one of the 4 envoys in charge of the Zhenchanju branch. She lives up to her name, and her whole person is like a red plum in the snow, cold and beautiful. You can just call me Mrs. Mei. I wonder who among you is the client. Mei Yu knelt down in front of the desk and poured herself a cup of tea with an elegant posture. Opposite him, Gu Switting took out something and put it on the table. That thing was the broken arrow taken out from his body. Mei Yu's pupils shrank when she saw it. She just received the news from her subordinates last night that Gu Switting was dead, but now the man in front of her took out the arrow that their netherworld pavilion used to assassinate Gu Switting. Who is he? As if hearing her thoughts, Gu Switting and Shen Yizi opposite them took off the disguise instruments from their faces. The true faces of the two men were revealed in front of Mei Yu. Gu Switting is not dead. And he even came to your door. Mei Yu, who had always been calm, could not help but change her face at this moment. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 568. The Nether Pavilion's first mission to assassinate Gu Switting ended in failure as almost the entire army was annihilated. Shortly afterwards, Gu Switting led his men to almost raid the Nether Pavilion's lair, causing them heavy losses and a severe loss of vitality. According to the rules of Netherworld Pavilion, a failed mission will not be accepted a second time, especially for someone as tough as Gu Switting. So this time when the client came to place an order, Mei Yu refused without even thinking about it. After all, no matter how much money you have, life is not as important. If it fails again this time and Gu Switting comes to find her, she is afraid that she will really sleep underground with Mai Hua. Keep company. Unexpectedly, the young pavilion master arrived just at this moment and took over the task directly, bypassing her. At this moment, the weapon in front of him to assassinate Gu Switting was also provided by the young pavilion master. I don't know what grudge the young pavilion master has against Gu Switting. Now, Gu Switting is right in front of her, so the news in the letter she received last night is obviously false. Mei Yu took a slow breath to steady her chaotic heartbeat. I wonder why His Highness King Chen came here. Shen Yizi chuckled softly. Didn't Mrs. Mei ask knowingly? I heard Ian said that Master Mei Yu is the smartest among the 8 envoys of the netherworld. Now that I have met her, it is not necessarily true. Zhongwen would never tell her what was going on inside Netherworld Pavilion. She saw this from the information submitted by Gu Switting's subordinates. Mei was humorous and silent. It seemed that they already knew that it was Netherworld Pavilion that did it. I couldn't help but think of what the young pavilion master said at that time. If Gu Switting dies this time, that's good. If he's not dead and he comes to the door, you don't have to carry him to death, just bring him to me directly. So she stood up directly and said, Your Highness, King Chen, come with me. Our young pavilion master has been waiting for you for a long time. Gu Switting and Shen Yizi looked at each other, both feeling a little surprised. It was another complicated and long journey. After passing through a moon gate, Mei Yu finally stopped, bowed to the two of them, and made a pleased gesture. The young pavilion master is inside. Looking at the exquisite courtyard in front of him, Shen Yizi suspected that this was a trap deliberately set by Yuming Pavilion. Gu Switting squeezed her hand and said, I'll be back as soon as I go. You wait for me outside for a while. Shen Yizi held his hand and said, Let's go in together. Gu Switting finally agreed. He led her up the steps and pushed open the house first. There was no light or shadow of the sword, the room looked normal. A man dressed in red turned around from the window. He had snowy skin, red lips, and peach blossom eyes. He was so beautiful that his gender was almost blurred. If it weren't for the Adam's apple on his neck that clearly showed his male identity, Shen Yizi would have thought he was a woman. What shocked her even more was that the evil man in red actually opened his mouth and called Gu Switting, Uncle Chen Wang, long time no see. Gu Switting didn't recognize him at first, her eyes were fixed on his face, and after a while he asked with some uncertainty, Xiaoqi. Gu 11 smiled and looked at Shen Yizi, this must be my little aunt. Shen Yizi was filled with doubts. Do the young pavilion master of Netherworld Pavilion and Gu Switting know each other? No, Not only do they know each other, they seem to be uncle and nephew. So, why did the eldest nephew let his men assassinate Gu Swiding? Is it possible that there is some grudge between the two? The room was heated by floor heating, and the floor was covered with a soft and thick carpet. The carpet was as white as the snow outside. The maid brought clogs, and Shenyazi and Gu Swiding put them on before walking in. Gu 11 led the two of them to the stove and sat down directly on the floor. Hung on the stove was a pot of soup, bubbling and fragrant. Gu 11 filled a bowl of soup for each of them and handed it to them. Shenyazi took it and reacted belatedly. Is there something wrong? Before she came here, she imagined a scene where she and the people from Netherworld Pavilion had a disagreement and got into a fight. How come it has now become a scene where relatives meet and sit together to drink soup? She stared at the steaming soup in front of her, her mind filled with doubts. Seeing that she didn't drink it, Gu 11 joked, "There's no poison in the soup, so don't worry, little ant." Shenyazi raised his eyebrows and simply put down the bowl. "Are you the seventh prince?" Gu 11 drank the soup with great taste. "No, seventh princess." Shenyazi couldn't help but feel glad that he didn't drink the soup at this moment, otherwise he would have had to spray it. Gu Swiding put his big palm on her back and spoke of the past in a deep voice. Xiaoqi originally had a twin sister named Yuiyu. On their 6th birthday, I took them to play in the garden for a day and went back. At that time, I suggested that the two of them exchange the clothes they were wearing to test whether Zhenfei could recognize them. As a result, the next day, I heard the news that the 7th prince fell into the water. In fact, it was Yuiyu who fell into the water wearing Xiaoqi's clothes. Concubine Zhen was afraid that something would happen to Xiaoqi, so she simply made the mistake and let him take the place of Yuiyu. Identity. Shenyazi held Gu Swiding's hand and silently gave him strength. Although his voice was flat when he narrated the past, and the past many years ago seemed to have passed, she could still feel the emotions surging under his calm appearance. But Yuiyu's death, it's not his fault. If you want to blame it, you should also blame the person who did it behind the scenes. But the 7th prince probably didn't think so. In his heart, he probably believed that Gu Swiding was the culprit who caused his sister's death. If his sister hadn't died, he wouldn't have had to dress up as a woman for so many years. So he wanted to kill Gu Swiding to avenge his sister. Shenyazi couldn't say that he was wrong. After all, he was only 6 years old when his sister died. He only knew that it was because of Gu Swiding's suggestion that his sister was killed in his place. After so many years, he must have avenged his sister. Obsession. At the moment she didn't know what to say. The charcoal is burning quietly in the stove. It is fine silver charcoal. There is no smell of smoke when burning. The soup pot hanging above is still making a puffing sound. Shenyazi added some soup to the pot and stirred it in circles. After a while, the soup became more fragrant. She took out the prepared vegetables one by one from the space, placed them on the low table beside her, put some meat and vegetables into the pot, took out a bottle of wine, and asked Gu 11 opposite, "Can I drink?" Gu 11 grabbed the wine directly from her hand, poured a glass herself, drank it all, and then poured another glass. Shenyazi took an empty bowl, put some cooked vegetables in it, and handed it over. "You can't just drink wine without eating vegetables, otherwise you will suffer from stomachache." Gu 11 didn't refuse, she took it and tasted it. "My little aunt's cooking is really good, it's much more delicious than what I make." Just like that, the three of them were eating and drinking, and the atmosphere gradually became less cold. Shenyazi asked, "Have you found out who the murderer was who killed Yuiyu?" Gu 11 put one hand on the ground and swayed the wine glass in the other. Hearing this, he sneered, "What do you think, little ant? The person who did it has long become a flower manure in the imperial garden. However, that person was just being instigated by others. The real person, the murderer, is still sitting on the phoenix throne. The person behind the scenes is the queen." No wonder Gu 11 couldn't move her. It is not difficult to move the queen, but how to explain it to the emperor is difficult. Unless, the emperor also falls with him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 569. Uncle Gu 11 raised his glass to Gu Switting. The two of them clinked their glasses and drank it down. Any barriers were eliminated in this glass of wine. Gu 11 leaned on the chair with a casual attitude. Twice, I sent people to kill you twice. The first time you killed almost all the people I sent. This time, I did not hesitate to sacrifice the death that Master gave me. I took out the magic arrow, but it still couldn't kill you. He smiled self-deprecatingly. Although this meteor god arrow is a counterfeit and cannot compare with the power of the real meteor god arrow, my master said that no one in this world can resist it. Once targeted by the meteor god arrow, you are on Pluto's death list, but you are still fine. Maybe God and you are protecting you. He looked at Gu Switting and said, brother-in-law, from now on our grudges will be wiped out and I won't take action against you anymore. After saying that, I drank another glass of wine. In fact, he knew that his uncle should not be blamed for Yueyu's death, but the people behind the scenes were really to blame. But reason is one thing, and emotion is another. He always couldn't help but think, if his uncle hadn't he proposed to let him and Yueyu change clothes, so that Yueyu would not die. There is no need for him to have to dress up as a woman for so many years and live in the world as Yueyu. So he hated him and wanted to kill him to avenge Yueyu. Although it was later discovered that the queen was the mastermind behind the scenes, he was unable to move the queen for a while, so he continued to pour all his hatred on him. However, he forgot that if he had not changed his clothes, he would have died. Yueyu accepted it on his behalf. This is something he has never dared to think about. Every day he lived, he felt like a sinner who had invaded his sister's life. He was filled with intense self-loathing and self-loathing. He sought death in every possible way. He secretly wanted to drag his uncle into this abyss of pain. The first assassination attempt on Gu Switting failed. He told himself that if he failed the second time, he would take back his hatred for him. When he gave away the meteorite arrow, he fell into an extremely complicated emotion. He wanted to succeed, but he was also afraid of actually hearing the news of Gu Switting's death. Just last night, when he received the news that King Chen is dead, he sat there all night. The scene of his uncle taking him and Yueyu to play together when he was a child was repeatedly recalled in his mind. The uncle died, but he did not feel happy at all, nor did he get any pleasure of successful revenge. Instead, a huge hole appeared in his heart, and the cold wind howled in the hole, and the chill swept through his body. Only then did he realize that he had just been deceiving himself and others. It was never his uncle that he hated, but himself, but he never wanted to admit it. When he learned that his uncle was still alive, he couldn't describe his state of mind at that moment. It was like he had been walking in the darkness but suddenly saw the light, and the hole in his heart was instantly blocked. The first ray of sunlight in the morning hit his face, and he suddenly laughed uncontrollably, silently at first, then wildly. Thinking of the things he had done before, he felt that he was so stupid that he could not get out of the horns of a bull's nest. Fortunately, he is out now. It's great that my uncle is still alive. Gu 11 sat next to Gu Switting and looked at him with a pair of bright eyes. Uncle, I was wrong, can you forgive me? Gu Switting flicked his forehead and said calmly, I have never blamed you, how can I forgive you? Gu 11 blinked and seemed to have no reaction. Her handsome and enchanting face actually looked a little silly and cute at the moment. After a while, she suddenly hugged Gu Switting and started crying. Shen Yizi looked at the man who was holding Gu Switting and drinking like crazy, and the corner of his mouth never stopped twitching. Is this the same young master of Netherworld Pavilion who was evil in the beginning? He is just a child who lacks love, okay. The scene of holding Goosewitting and crying loudly was simply unbearable. With some disgust, Goosewitting took away his eldest nephew who was covered in tears and snot, and threw a handkerchief over him. Okay, wipe your tears, there has been no progress at all after so many years. Goo 11 flat-mouthed, picked up the handkerchief and blew her nose. When he was done, he found that Shenyazi had been holding a palm-sized stone towards him, tilted his head and asked, "Little ant, what are you doing?" Shenyazi suppressed a smile. "I think you are too cute now, so I will record your current appearance as a souvenir." She felt that the drunk Goo 11 had turned into Goo Sansui. What would his expression be like if he sobered up and remembered his actions? It doesn't matter if you don't remember. Didn't she record it? Then she will show it to him so that he can recall it. That picture must be interesting. Goo 11's current IQ is only 3 years old. She didn't feel anything was wrong after listening to Shenyazi's words. Instead, she cooperated with him by showing a series of actions such as sticking out his tongue and poking his dimples. "Yeah, okay, that's it." Shenyazi tried hard to hold back his smile and pointed the shadow stone at him. Goosewitting held his forehead, but did not stop him. Instead, he watched with a smile on his face. In the end, Shenyazi coaxed Goo 11 to walk for a while and recorded it without missing a scene. She watched the several images recorded on the recording stone from beginning to end, laughing so hard that her intestines were knotted, and she couldn't help but pat her thighs. Goosewitting looked at her helplessly and indulgently. "Is it really that funny?" "You will know if you come and see for yourself." Shenyazi pulled him over. Then the unscrupulous couple laughed together. Having been completely taken advantage of, 1111 lay on the ground and fell asleep without any idea of the dark history he had left behind. Although the floor was carpeted, it was easy to catch cold. Goosewitting carried Goo 11 to the couch and placed him there, covered him with a quilt, gave him a hangover pill, and left with Shenyazi. As he passed the door, he told the maid, "Goo Mansion, Bronze Lane, Chungzi Road, if your young pavilion master asks." The maid was stunned for a moment, then realized that he reported her own address, and said hurriedly, "Yes." After leaving the courtyard, the two met Mayu. "The young pavilion master ordered me to give this to His Highness King Chan." She handed over a task order. Every person who comes to Netherworld to place an order must fill out a form, stating the task goal, describing the target information, etc., so that the person placing the task can accurately find the target. And what Mayu handed over to Goosewitting was the order to assassinate Goosewitting. It has the signature of the entrustor. Yuming Pavilion has always followed rules and will never disclose the client's information, so everyone can feel free to come here to place an order. It's just that the rules are for those below. Even if the young master Goo 11 leaks the client's information, no one can do anything to him. Goosewitting did not look at it immediately after taking it, but put it away, nodded to Mayu, and left with Shenyazi. Adorable baby, the miracle doctor is so awesome. Author, 955. Chapter 570. Chungzi Street is not far from Zhenchan residence, and the two of them walked there in about 10 minutes. It's just a good time to take a walk to eat. It gets dark early in winter. At this time, the shops on the street have hung up lanterns, and most pedestrians have gone home. Arriving in front of the Goo Mansion, Goosewitting stepped forward and clicked the bronze animal head ring on the door. A loud dog barking immediately sounded inside. Not long after, a one-armed man in his 40s opened the door and saw Goosewitting outside. A burst of surprise, "Your Majesty. Come in quickly." As soon as the two of them entered, a dog rushed over and pounced on Goosewitting, licking his face with its hot tongue, very passionately. "Ha ha, Xiao He still remembers the Prince Shihu," the one-armed man said. Goosewitting hugged Xiao He's neck and avoided its passionate licking. Shen Yizi looked on with a smile. She who noticed her and was shocked when he saw her face. He quickly guessed her identity. I guess this is the princess, right? Gu Swiding finally calmed Xiao He down and said to Shen Yi, Zhizi, this is Uncle Shi, a warrior under my command before. Unfortunately, his arm was bitten off by a monster in a battle. Shen Yizi called Uncle Shi. Shi who waved his hands hurriedly, but you can't do that. Princess, just call me Lao Shi. You haven't eaten yet, right? I'm going to make something to eat. Gu Swiding stopped him, Uncle Shi, there's no need to work anymore, Zhizi and I have already eaten. You can go and have a rest. Shi who scratched the back of his head and said, okay, if anything happens, just call me. Xiao He, let's go. He tried to take Xiao He away so as not to disturb the prince and his wife, but Xiao He stayed at Gu Swiding's legs, refusing to leave and whining. It looks like a coquettish child, which really doesn't match its majestic image. Shen Yizi was amused and touched its head. Xia He glanced at her. Although it was the first time he saw this woman, her breath smelled very good. When Shen Yizi took out a basin of meat bones, Xiao He immediately abandoned Gu Swiding, lowered his head and ate the meat bones with relish. She who smelled the strong aroma emanating from the meat bones and felt a little greedy. Shen Yizi took out a few more side dishes suitable for drinking, including braised beef, pig ears, peanuts, glutinous rice sausage, and a pot of wine. Uncle Shi, I made this myself. You can try it. If she was saying goodbye, Shi who might not accept it, but these things in front of her touched Shi who's heart. How can this be so embarrassing? Uncle Shi, eat slowly, Zhizi and I are going to rest first. Gu Swiding led Shen Yizi to the main courtyard. In the house, the furniture and furnishings are very Gu Swiding's style, simple and restrained, with solemn colors. Because no one has lived there for a long time, it looks very deserted. Shen Yizi immediately started setting up, and Gu Swiding was also helping. Not long after, the style of the house changed drastically, from cold and dull to soft and warm. Shen Yizi arranged a bouquet of flowers, took a few steps back to admire it, it felt perfect, and wanted Gu Swiding to praise him. Turning around, he saw him sitting on the couch, looking down at something, his body seemed to be frozen. Average. She walked over and what he was looking at was the order sheet that Yu gave him. She took the list over, read it over, and focused on the place where she signed, Li Si. A very common and carefree name. She seriously doubted that this was a pseudonym. Perhaps he is an errand boy. Once we find this Li Si, we can find out the person behind him. Shen Yizi took out a tracking talisman, input spiritual energy to activate it, and the tracking talisman floated in mid-air. Then she burned the order form, and the burning smoke was absorbed by the tracking charm next to it. The tracking charm spun around in mid-air, finally figured out the direction, and flew out of the window. Hurry, let's follow, Shen Yizi pulled Gu Swiding to catch up. Following the tracking talisman, the two of them came to Yizhuang, a place dedicated to parking bodies of unknown origins and unclaimed bodies. There was only one old man guarding the righteous village. Because the weather was too cold, he was huddled in the house warming himself by the fire. There was an old yellow dog lying next to him. The arrival of Shen Yizi and Gu Swiding was silent, and the old man didn't notice it at all, but the old yellow dog suddenly raised its head, seeming to be aware of it, but in the end it lay back down. The two entered the morgue and found Li Si's body accurately. Shen Yizi opened the white cloth and took a look, and concluded, he was drowned, and the time was no more than 10 days. This man also smelled strongly of alcohol. Normally, even if a man is examined, he will only conclude that he fell into the water and drowned after being drunk. But this man placed an order at Zhenshan House and fell into the water and died. Who can believe this coincidence? Unsurprisingly, it was the person behind the killing, and the purpose was naturally to silence him. Now, Things are a bit tricky. After all, they can't burn Li Si to collect the breath left by the killer. What's more, after so many days, the breath left by the killer has probably dissipated completely. While Shen Yizi was thinking, Gu Switting suddenly pulled her back a few steps. What's wrong? Shen Yizi followed his gaze and was shocked. I saw a dark figure squatting under the wooden shelf where Li Si's body was placed. To be precise, it was a ghost. The ghost of Li Si. Unexpectedly, his soul actually stayed near the body. Shen Yizi tried to communicate with him to see if he could get information about the killer, but he just squatted there motionless with a blank expression. It seems that communication is impossible. Shen Yizi couldn't help but sigh. I thought there was a turning point, but in the end my happiness was in vain. At this moment, Xie Wangxiang's request came from the nightmare bead on her wrist. Zhizi, can I come out? Xie Wangxiang has been practicing in the nightmare pearl since she received the ghost cultivation technique presented by Shen Yizi. Now that she has achieved some success, she wanted to come out for some fresh air. Of course, I had to tell Shen Yizi before I came out, otherwise it would be embarrassing if I accidentally bumped into some R-rated scene. Shen Yizi felt happy. How could she forget Xie Wangxiang? Maybe she can find a way to communicate with Li Si's soul. As soon as Xie Wangxiang came out, she found that the surroundings were full of corpses, especially Li Si, whose dignity was soaked in blisters, which really frightened her, and she hurriedly hid behind Shen Yizi. Shen Yizi. Sister, aren't you a ghost? Why are you still afraid of corpses? She probably acted too obviously. Xie Wangxiang saw it and muttered, although I am a ghost, I have never dealt with a corpse, so naturally I am afraid. She spoke quite confidently. Shen Yizi pointed under the wooden shelf and said, this man's name is Li Si. See if you can get anything out of him. What do you want to know?